I got a quick turnaround here so we can stay on schedule. So again, welcome everybody to day one of the 2020 MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. My name is Colby Smith. I'm a first-year MBA student here at MIT Sloan. And this Competitive Advantage talk, along with all of our Competitive Advantage talks, is sponsored by the Craft Analytics Group. So one note for the question and answer period at the end of the presentation, please wait until you get the microphone. We're going to have a runner with a mic, so just wait till you have that, especially since this is recorded, and we appreciate it. So we're lucky today to have Scott Hallenbeck. He's the Executive Director and CEO of USA Football, and his presentation is titled The Football Development Model, Youth Football Reimagined. So please join me in welcoming Scott.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, well, glad to be here. So a little context for this. So we know football is America's favorite sport. It has always evolved. It continues to evolve. We know, we hopefully read about and hear about, the rule changes and the practice guideline changes and how we're reducing contacts at every level of the game. The big thing we continue to talk about is changing the culture and changing the narrative. So as hopefully I take you through this, that will come apparent. Because we've been struggling, frankly, for the last year and a half, 2 years, I think as a collective football sport, as a community, trying to figure out how do you change the culture, how do you change the narrative. And just the rule changes alone haven't really done that yet. I'll show you some data that speaks to the participation levels and some of that, but we really have to get into a deeper discussion about how we do this. And that's what leads us to this idea of reimagining football. We take that very seriously, that idea that we have to do more than what has traditionally been done. And we're very proud of the changes and the evolution of this sport already, but it has to be more. So I guess I should have this guy. So I want to talk through that. So first, a little background on USA Football. We are the national governing body. That is actually new. That's unique to football. We are a member of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. We work with, there's actually an International Federation of American Football with some 60 countries around the world that play our sport. Obviously, they're developing slowly, but and they play flag a whole lot better than they play tackle football. But there's a love for this sport around the world, and it's emerging every day. So that's very exciting. This is just a little snapshot of the type of partners that we get to work with. So we work with all the professional leagues. We work with the college community. We work with the high school community. Our focus is largely on the youth community. Get our arms around youth football, the foundation of the game, and help it create new standards and best practices. And going back to a little context, the challenge, one of the serious challenges in youth sport, and certainly in football, is this idea of fragmentation, limited, if any, standards, no real strong best practices, no common structure, no common nomenclature. So again, these are themes that we tried to address and are addressing in this notion of reimagining football. So some of the data. Over the last 5 years, if you can see this, over 6 to 17, there's nearly 4 million kids playing our sport. Okay, that's more than most, and predominantly boys. So high school football is the most boy participation. I think it's almost double than the next sport. I think it's track and field and basketball are sort of right there. But just in the last 5 years alone, overall 9% decline. But if you can see that gray bar, 6 to 12, an important focal group for us, is 12% down. As you go down underneath that, though, you look at 6 to 17 flag, and it's up 25%. Now, the predominance of that would be that 6 to 12 at 31% increase. So a couple important takeaways for us here. Number one, the market's telling us things. Parents want more options, more choice. Okay? Traditional football, when people think of football, they think of tackle football. And they largely think of 11-a-side, full field football. Okay? We're broadening that definition, broadening that scope. Flag has traditionally been in its own silo, and tackle been in its own silo. And we want to make sure we can look at how these things come together. Another interesting point, if you look at the last 5 years, there's actually more kids playing football in its broadest sense than there was 5 years ago. So this is important information that we're getting, that there's still a great love for the sport. They want to look at other entry points and options. Another piece of information, we did extensive research in the last 18 months. Over 11,000 respondents parents in football, parents out of football, coaches in football, coaches out of football, retired. We looked at communities across the country, so the South versus the Northwest versus the Northeast. We looked at all these options. And in short, what this is telling us is parents, again, love the sport. They want to look at it differently. They're open to the idea of playing tackle football. So again, traditional tackle football, 11 aside, full field, as their kids get older. So that gives us an important perspective on, well, let's look at what could fill that gap. How do we sort of backfill in terms of developing a pathway for participation? So one of the things we did is we went to the U.S. Olympic Committee. And we spent time with them and said, what are other sports doing? And in long story short, they had created something called the American Development Model. And you may be familiar with this, but pretty much every governing body out there in every sport today is adopting this concept of a pathway and a progression for the sport. So if you think of baseball, you have T-ball, coach pitch, player pitch. That's been around a long time. You look at basketball. There's a focus on 3-on-3 and 5-on-5. There's a focus on a 6-foot hoop and an 8-foot hoop and a 10-foot hoop, different size balls. The U.S. Tennis Association came out with this whole new concept called U10 tennis. They did a brilliant thing in working with their manufacturers and creating larger size rackets and different colored balls and different weighted balls. They could go cross court and the ball wouldn't travel as far, but they could really work on fundamentals. Hockey has gone cross ice. Every sport is looking at how they reimagine their sport, so they continue to focus on the development of the sport. So we converted that idea of American Development Model to the football development model. Another important lesson, we had the benefit of working with these governing bodies and learning what went well and maybe what didn't go so well. So one of the things that went very well for a lot of them was this idea of bringing together a diverse council of experts. So we put together what we call the Football Development Council. And we started with someone right in our backyard. We're based in Indianapolis. And Dr. Brian Hainline is probably one of the true experts in this whole field. So he has worked with the U.S. Tennis Association to help build their whole model. He worked with USA Basketball. He worked with hockey. He worked with the U.S. Olympic Committee to create the American Development Model. So we asked him to chair. He's also the chief medical officer for the NCAA. Chair this committee. So he helped identify other medical experts, the likes of child behavioral experts. We actually brought in probably the lead long-term athlete development experts in the entire world in Canada, Dr. Stephen Norris, helped build out the entire long-term athlete development plan for the country of Canada and all of their sports, including Football Canada. We also brought in our friends from the U.S. Olympic Committee, so the head of all of their coaching development, and a variety of others. Then we had a cross-section of football experts, from youth football administrators and coaches all the way up to the professional levels. And we said, help work with us to define this new pathway. And one of the things we did right off the bat, which I think is really important, we took on the responsibility in an entirely objective format to say, let's look at age restriction, because that's what's out there, right? The narrative is you just don't play until 12 or 14. Frankly, we don't believe in that. There's no consensus whatsoever from the medical community in terms of not playing. There's consensus in pathways. There's evidence that these progression models make more sense. So look at it through the lens of expanding the funnel, expanding the options. And so we challenged that notion. And we went through an anonymous, confidential Delphi process. So in lieu of epidemiological long-term studies, the medical community does something called the Delphi process, which is they create founding statements and they have a diverse group of experts provide confidential anonymous input, right? So it'd be something like, when should a child put a helmet on? Or when should contact football first start for children? And as you would expect, it was all over the place. And I will be the first to tell you, everyone in this room probably has different opinions. And often what we had when we talked to the college coaches and the high school coaches was, if you're asking me what I would do with my child, yeah, I might not have him play till 8 or 10 or 12 or 14, or I might not play at all. But if you're telling me that you're going to tell me when my child can play, no, not having that. So that when we go to the legislatures and we talk to them, same thing, parent choice. We want to present a new fundamental model here that's about parent choice and redefine what football looks like. And that's ultimately what comes down to the why in the FDM. It's about addressing the culture, addressing the narrative. It's about giving parents confidence. And who we look at is not the parents, frankly, in the sport. We're looking at those parents sitting on the fence. You have to prove to me, football, that you are looking at this very seriously, that you are doing things that give me more confidence and give me options. And ultimately, the long term, 5, 10 years, is yes, first start with retention. Take that 12% and make it 10, make it 8, right? And then hopefully get new people back into the sport in this whole new paradigm. So it made 3 major components. The football development model, coaching education, which is the backbone of what we do as an organization. We certified over 700,000 coaches just in the last 6 years. We certified more than any other governing body. We also added a league excellence program. I'll take you through this stuff quickly. And last but not least, we have to do a better job, USA Football, but all of the stakeholders, in telling a better story about those that are doing things right in the football community. So what this all comes down to is first this notion of football for all. Again, widen the funnel. Make sure that people really believe in entry points and options, okay? It also, the entire narrative is around contact. It's not about an age. It's about how do you reduce contacts? How do you give people choice? How do you make sure there's a real progression in how you develop? So we realized the focus for us has to be on this notion, this paradigm, if you will, of non-contact, limited contact, and contact. And how can I take a child, 6, 8, whenever they might start, and progress them up that chart or up that pathway? Okay, so then game types. I talked to you already about no common nomenclature in football, right? We're trying to reestablish a nomenclature. Simple. So non-contact, of course, would be flag. There might even be other variations of this. But limited contact, one of the challenges we have in our ecosystem is you have the football traditionalists, again, largely tackle organizations, and then you have this audience that wants new options and likes the idea of flag as a starting point. And we're talking a serious dichotomy, right? We did the research, and those in football would be totally comfortable with kids not starting till 8. Those outside football are more comfortable with kids starting at 12, right? How do you bridge this gap? We believe this model does it. So we created this idea of limited contact. So those in traditional football, if you're not quite ready to change your culture and actually create a model where you're going to adopt flag as your first entry point, look at the idea of limited contact. The definition of limited contact for us is no tackling to the ground. So you actually can have padded flag. Most kids, frankly, love the idea of football being with helmet and shoulder pads on. In fairness, there's also research out there. Iowa did an important study that actually suggests that flag has some injuries as well. And so having on a helmet and shoulder pads lends itself to also a safer environment. So this could be another starting point. This isn't exactly mean you have to go flag, follow step by step. We have to make sure we give choice, and we have to give options, and we have to empower our leagues to help do things the right way. So rookie, by definition for us, is smaller size fields, okay, with rule modifications. Limited contact, again, no tackling on the ground. Senior, by definition, is full-size fields. So it's a whole lot easier to go from a non-contact environment teaching you fundamental skills, passing, catching, route running, breakdown position, backpedaling, and then transition you, just put on helmet and shoulder pads, okay, and transition you to those same exact skills, but now you have equipment on. Believe it or not, that's a big change. Then I can actually start teaching you, we call it prep for contact. I can start teaching you contact in a very defined, systematic way. I can teach you a breakdown position. I can act in this game, if you can see it, might be a little hard. It's either padded flag and limited contact or what now is called tackle bar. It's that harness around the waist with those 2 foam pads in the back. It actually allows us to better teach tackling. So really get the proper breakdown position, shoulder strike, head to the side, but in the end, you're just pulling that foam bar. So you're not tackling to the ground. That's a relatively simple transition. And then finally, when you're ready, one thing I didn't mention that's really important to this. It's all about age appropriateness and developmental readiness. So we're looking at it differently. Not every 8-year-old's the same. Not every 10-year-old's the same. So cognitively, physically, emotionally, we have to engage the parents. You have to be part of this solution. We have to work as a football community to figure out what that right paradigm is and what that right pathway is for your child specifically. But we're going to create this framework that allows you to function within it and develop within it. And then last but not least, again, when you're ready, you transition to contact. And contact by definition, in this definition, is tackle football. So we created something called Rookie Tackle about 2 years ago. We piloted it in places like Texas and Florida and others. Overwhelmingly positive. And what this did was take the 100-yard field, change the culture, pull it down to a 40 by 35 or 60 by 35, 6, 7, or 8 players. Kids play multiple positions, which in and of itself is a big deal. No special teams, no blitzing, 2-point stance, no 3-point stance. Basically, rule modifications that help kids develop and evolve and ease into the sport. And then last but not least, senior tackle. Full field, 11 aside if you have those numbers. And oh, by the way, what you haven't heard me say is what's the age model? Because I don't know what the age model is. The age model depends on you as a parent, you as a league, you as a community, what's best for your community, your ecosystem. We're building a new reimagined framework for how you do this. This is just an example of that. Again, everything is focused on reducing contacts and creating a model that allows kids to develop at their pace. So we meet them where they are. I want to move a little more quickly. So coaching education. We have to expand our education program. We created something about probably now 8, 9 years ago called Heads Up Football. Foundational safety program. 8,000 leagues across the country participated in it. Trust me, I'm talking the Wild West in youth football. They get 8,000 leagues to do anything was a massive step forward. So, but we're adding anti-abuse. I mean, sadly, we know the tragedy around gymnastics and now Boy Scouts and other things. We got to make sure these coaches who walk in this field have the highest standards of coaching excellence and coaching preparedness. Coach 101, why are you coaching? Why, if you're in this just to win at 8 years old and 10-year-old, you're in it for all the wrong reasons, and frankly, we don't want you in football. You got to be doing this for the right reasons. It's about developing these kids and helping them get to the stair steps of high school and let the high school professional coaches take it from there. Okay? We're going to have health and safety. We're going to build on Heads Up Football. This middle bar, and you got to go through each of these as you work your way through to actually get certified. This is based on child behavioral experts. How do you develop kids 5 to 7, 8 to 9, 10 and 11? How do you, and dealing with an 8-year-old is very different from dealing with a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old. How do we make sure you're prepared? How do we break up the teaching and the fundamentals of football into these various age-based models? You would stop there if you're doing flag, obviously. So that would be as far as you go. But as you transition to limited contact and contact, we start to really break down prep for contact and how you teach contact. And all of this now includes practice plans and drills and a myriad of other things to help you develop in this sport. So ultimately, what was the feedback of parents? Again, extensive research. In short, 81% came back and said, this is the right solution for football. We believe in this. You have a mix of safety standards. You've expanded the entry points. You're hyper-focused on coaching education. A whole child approach, I should have mentioned this. So the idea that isn't just about technical, tactical, and X's and O's. We have to talk about mental health. It's a serious issue in our society today, right? We have to talk about character and leadership, and nutrition, and all these other things. Again, how do we prep coaches to make sure they're part of our system to help these kids evolve and advance? So in short, the parents are supportive. Same on the coaches' side. The first experienced coaches, because they don't like change, right, was rookie tackle. Wow, this isn't right. I got 6 kids in the field. I should have 11. About 4 or 5 practices into it, they're like, wait a minute, this is great. I have a smaller coach-to-player ratio. My kids are more comfortable. I can actually see them progressing and getting better. So in short, again, they're supportive of this. League excellence. So that's just one major component, right? Then we said, wait a minute, we got to do more. Because if we don't run youth football leagues, so it's the classic lead the horse to water, we can't make them drink. No governing body has mandate authority. So when you hear things like, well, U.S. soccer said you can't head till 12, and hockey says you can't check till 14, those are rule modifications. Those are practice guidelines. They don't mandate that 100% can actually do it. So the fact is we've got to work with these groups, and we've got to help move them along. We've got to hold their hands. We've got to pull them forward. So we created this League Excellence program that in short is about how do I just elevate the standards of these volunteer-based leagues. God bless these volunteers because youth sports wouldn't exist without them, but we can do better, and we need to do better. So we've elevated the best practices, elevated the standards. It's focused on making sure the kids have the best possible experience. We got to, again, build trust and credibility with parents. And ultimately, how do we celebrate leagues? So we created a good housekeeping seal-like approach. We're setting, these are the standards at bronze, these are the standards at silver, these are the standards at gold. And then these are all the benefits and incentives if you do it. So we won't necessarily call out the leagues that aren't going to embrace this, but we're sure as heck not going to get behind them and put some aggressive marketing and advocacy behind them. Because I've got all of the stakeholders with us. I've got all the professional leagues. I've got the Power 5 college conferences saying, tell me how I can help. We've got networks, we've got stadiums, we've got all kinds of assets to help tell this story the right way. So they want to help. So how do I hold people to a higher standard, but then celebrate them and reward them when they're doing it the right way? So in short, this is the kind of groups that are out there that are helping us. This is going to be a whole new narrative around football, but we're doing it the right way. It's not about what happens at the professional league, frankly, or the college level. It's what are we doing in our communities and our backyards to help football develop and frankly get back to what it's always been, which is this really strong community of leaders, high school and youth that are working together to make sure these kids just have a great experience. The real tragedy is around inactivity and obesity and those kinds of things. Football's not for everyone. That's okay. Neither is, frankly, swimming or volleyball or other things. It's okay, but we want to create a model that respects the development of these children, respects parents, respects the sport, and does it in a whole new way. So in short, USA Football and really all these stakeholders are committed to reimagining this sport, making it safer, making it more positive. We're obviously focused on this vision of game types and age appropriateness and skill development. We are confident that this is going to change the culture and the narrative, and we believe in this notion of a combination of league excellence and a new reimagined model coupled with coaching education is the right solution for the future. So it leaves a very limited time, but rush through that a little bit. But any questions? Oh, I guess you got to.
So for limited contact, you said the tackle is not to the ground. Is that just a tackle that we have to stop forward momentum?
Yep. Yeah, you would have. I mean, there's going to be a little art and science in that in terms of changing that and teaching that. But yes, you would create a strike, but then you'd stop, and there would be literal penalties if you take a child to ground. The model would be if you go down twice, you're actually out of the game. So we have to put those kinds of things in place, and that is true culture change. There are very few that are comfortable or have experienced that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Get your exercise today.
Normally I would shout, but I've lost my voice. What's your timeline for implementing this new model?
So, good question. We actually did a pilot program this past football season, and now we've launched it at our national conference about 2 weekends ago. And I will say that what's really exciting, a little overwhelming, is that the high school community and the youth community has really embraced this. And we're going to create a state strategy where we go in on the state level and start effectively having almost like town hall meetings where we're bringing these leaders back together and working through this. So the answer to your question is we are effectively launching it. We are looking at I would define it as a quality over quantity model. We're going to crawl before we walk before we run, and then grow from there. We see this as easily a 5-year to 10-year proposition to try to truly scale it. But we are out there with leagues, and also what's exciting is maybe because sport generally is competitive and football certainly is, the leagues with that league excellence program are like fired up about, well, I got to be gold. Like, okay, that's fine, but you have to get there. So we're not handing out gold status. So anyway, there's a real enthusiasm, momentum that I think is taking place with this. That's exciting, but this is all about standards, and we got to hold people to those things.
So when I imagine the future of football, I see helmets and traditional shoulder pads disappearing and being replaced by maybe pads built into uniforms in a game. There's maybe a hybrid between flag football and touch football, maybe with sensors, and lacrosse and soccer. Have you discussed that kind of path towards a professional flag football type league that isn't really emphasizing contact necessarily, but it's still got a lot of great stuff in it?
That may be sort of the next evolution and generation of football potentially. So we haven't quite gotten there. We believe this is a pretty dramatic and substantial evolution and change. But there is a group out there that has a professional flag group, and I would share with this group. I don't mind sharing. We are looking at even flag in the Olympics. We have looked at tackle, and frankly, it's not as you might immediately expect because of the safety concerns. The Olympics are 17 days, so you can't play enough tackle football games with 8 to 10 to 12 teams in 17 days. It's not going to work. And the size of the delegation, men, women, disabled, never going to work. So we are carefully looking at flag in the Olympics, and there's a lot of enthusiasm around that as well. So anyway, I don't have that vision quite yet, but it very well could evolve to that.
Comment and a question. As a mom of a 6-year-old boy who is excited about football, I can't tell you what your presentation just did for me and the relief. I actually just texted my husband. I was like, honey, I think I'm cool with football now. So thank you. My question is thinking of him in mind of, going out, there's so much of this that starts at the volunteer level, and perhaps this gets to the 5 to 10 year comment that you made, but how does this trickle down to, the groups I live in Winchester, and how does all that get to that level that will affect my child?
So excellent question. So we're a national organization. We work with, there's some 8,500 youth organizations across the country, and again, limited standards. We have to work through them. So we have all of that data. We built the database of all the commissioners and all the coaches. And what has missed in the past, unlike almost every other sport, if your kids play other sports, the lacrosses, the swimming that was just in here, just about all of them have a membership program. And they have access to you as the mom and you as the parent, and they can communicate. Football doesn't have that, and that's a problem. One of the things I didn't mention is we are basically saying you've got to give us the data. You've got to let us talk to the mom and tell them if you meet the standards that you're doing things the right way. So we actually travel around the country. We do thousands of clinics across the country. We get into those communities and we meet with those coaches. We have a whole online education program, so we do it online as well as in person. And one of the things we're adding is an entire parental communication strategy. How do we tell them this story? And quite candidly, again, with all due respect to our commissioners and our coaches, you're the most important. They now get it. They're like, help us talk to a parent. And I'm saying, but understand, a parent has the ultimate sort of veto power, right? If they don't trust you, they're not putting their kid in their program. So if you're going to do this, you better do it with your eyes wide open, and we better embrace parents and make them part of the solution. So, in youth sports, I don't mind also saying parents can be crazy, but we've got to find the balance. And so we're working through that. So that will be our inherent challenge. That's another reason we're going to the state level, because we're going to build a coalition of these organizations helping to hold each other accountable, but also have parent town hall meetings. I want to talk directly to the parents and tell them the story and say to you, you have the power to make sure that coach is certified more than I do. You make sure you walk in and say, are you certified with USA Football? Did you follow these? Did you get a background check? Are you anti-abuse trained? You have the ultimate power. So that's why we want to leverage the relationship with parents.
That's tough.
They're going to kick me off the stage. Yeah, one more, I guess.
So you talked a lot about the impact of safety, and I'm just wondering, have you guys done much detailed analysis on the drivers on the decline of participation, and like what percentage of that is related to safety versus cost or access and things like that? Like what are the drivers and relative contributions?
That's a more than fair question. So we basically don't know as much as we need to there, candidly. The general assumption is the safety narrative, the concern around it is definitely causing it, but there also is sport specialization. There is a lot of evidence and research around the idea of kids are just dropping out of sport by 12 and 13 years old. So there's a myriad of factors, we believe. I don't have it well defined yet. One of the things we did as an organization is really commit and make an investment in a research and analytics expert to help us with this. So we're just getting off the ground there. So unfortunately, I don't have the great detail, but we think it's a combination of things that are impacting that. All right, well, again, pleasure. Thank you so much for being here, and have a great conference.